Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, episodes 1 and 2. Gonna merge the first two episodes together for you. This series adapts an era of J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth about which we know very little other than the ending. But still, in these first two episodes, impressively manages to weave in mystery and some stunning production design. So let's break down the deeper meaning and details that you might have missed in these first two episodes. And just to be clear, I don't give a shit about any of the reasons people are mad at this show. To me, this is all fantasy, and I'm just loving the ride. And my job with this breakdown is just to point out all the cool stuff about it that I like. So episode 1 opens with the voice of Galadriel.
Nothing is evil in the beginning. And there was a time when the world was so young, there had not yet been a sunrise. But even then, there was light.
Galadriel is our protagonist of this series, an elven warrior played by Morfydd Clark, the elder version of whom is played by Cate Blanchett in the Peter Jackson films. The events of Lord of the Rings take place in the Third Age of Middle-earth. This series will be set during the little-known Second Age. The end of that age was recapped by Galadriel's voiceover in the prologue to Peter Jackson's Fellowship of the Ring, when Sauron tricked the elves and dwarves and men into forging the 19 Rings of Power, while he secretly had the one ring to rule them all. This series will document how those characters got to that point. But in this opening, before Galadriel even speaks, we hear some singing voices. This is the Song of the Valinor, described later by Elrond.
I hear it said that when you cross over, you hear a song, one whose memory we all carry, and you are immersed in a light more intoxicating than any sensation in all of Middle-earth.
For adult Galadriel, this is a haunting siren song, a warning that she cannot go home again. Truly, none of us can. And with the words, "nothing is evil in the beginning," this series taps into a core distinction with Tolkien's themes. Evil is not a constant absolute that always existed in the world, it's something that is forged by decisions and concessions. At the end of the day, goodness still runs through all things, and while that goodness can be corrupted, it still remains there. And it is the one constant that was always there before the sunrise. It can always be found again. As our dear friend Samwise will tell us ages from now, there is goodness left in the world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. This pre-sunrise light that we're in right now actually comes from the two trees of Valinor, Lorelin and Telperion. This land of Valinor is the ethereal undying realm located across the sea from Middle-earth. This was created by the Valar, kind of the archangels of this universe. High elves were actually originally awakened in Middle-earth, but then were brought to Valinor, though not the Sylvan elves who stayed behind in Middle-earth. Young Galadriel folds parchment that unfolds into an elven swan boat, foreshadowing her own voyage at the end of this episode, including how she doesn't complete that voyage. This boat transforms midstream, just as Galadriel will finally understand her brother's wisdom as she is mid-voyage. Her brother, Finrod, lifts the boat with his dagger, the dagger that will later become hers as she takes on his mission to hunt Sauron. He turns the boat into a parable here. Stones sink because they can only look downward, whereas boats fix their gaze forward, toward the light. He whispers a secret about how the boat would know where to go, revealed at the end of the episode.
Sometimes we cannot know until we have touched the darkness.
Another important theme to this series. We know that the distant future of this narrative will end with Frodo leaving with the elves, including Galadriel, on a vessel to Valinor, but before any of us can earn that final passage, we must touch the darkness at least. Galadriel explains how the two trees get extinguished by the forces of Morgoth, plunging Valinor into darkness. So here we are seeing the First Age events, documented in the Silmarillion. These are the Wars of the Jewels, aka the Silmarils. These are the precious gems that were actually crafted from the light of the two trees. These trees were destroyed actually in the book by Melkor in the Spider the Ungoliant. Here we see the trees turning black as if poisoned, which may actually be the same black bile that spews from the cow and inks through the leaf that King Gil-galad catches. And as the elves leave their home of Valinor to return to Middle-earth, right away we see this insane battle, including some eagles fighting some Felbeast-looking flying creatures. So for any of you smartasses out there who think they were the first one to discover that Tolkien plot hole, why didn't they just take the eagles to Mordor? This is why, my friends, Sauron had freaking Nazgul riding on some Felbeasts. The eagles weren't the only things that could fly back then. The skies were not safe, and the eagles, you couldn't blame them for not being eager to die like this. So when your enemy has aerial firepower, it means you gotta walk the long way with a couple hobbits and a golem. I love how Finrod skewers two orcs in one stab, and he screams, "Valoran Kaladin!" which translates to, "By the light of the Valar!" and Therovante! They will die. These are both in the Elvish language of Quenya. We see some bodies on spears float in the water. This is the aftermath of the War of Wrath, the final of these wars, which defeated Morgoth but sunk the landmass of Beleriand. So avenging her brother, Galadriel hunts Sauron for centuries, up until where we now catch up with her in the Faroed Waith, using Finrod's dagger to stab the ice wall. Interesting, before he used it to fish her paper boat from the stream, now she uses it to plunge deeper into a frozen stream. Thundir asks,
how long can living flesh endure where even sunlight fears to tread?
Galadriel responds,
We are losing the light.
now they're talking about the literal daylight, but metaphorically, Galadriel sees this as an existential battle between light and dark. She seems far more alive in the darkness of this opening sequence than she ever is in the light of the ending of the episode. They find Morgoth's old stronghold in this hidden room.
These orcs were meddling with the powers of the unseen world. Some dark sorcery of old. But what was their purpose?
Presumably these orcs aided Sauron in a ritual to exile him maybe to the void or to help shapeshift him into whatever new form he's now taken in this series. Galadriel's even wrong in thinking that he went further north. No. She's pointed in the wrong direction. He's more likely in the Southlands, right under their noses. His symbol still burns hot, sizzling the snow as it lands, similar to how on the Ring of Power it was revealed in heat, despite that ring itself staying quite cool. We glide into the map showing the Rovanian Wilderlands. The contour of the map dissolves perfectly into the live-action hillside. It's so oddly satisfying. Two hunters wearing moose antlers pass a group of camouflaged Harfoots. These are the ancestral predecessors to hobbits described in Tolkien's prologue to Fellowship of the Ring concerning hobbits. They're led by Sadok, the Elder and Trail Finder. He tracks the stars in his book to guide the group on their migration path. Our focal character is Nori Brandyfoot. The Brandyfoot family name, most likely a mix of hobbit families like the Proudfoots, the likely descendants of the Brandyfoots. The story goes that Tolkien started really with the sentence, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit," and built his entire Middle-earth fiction from there. And truly here, I love how we just see these Harfoots emerging from holes. The berry patch that Nori and Poppy lead the kids into is patrolled by this wolf creature, likely the same one that cleared the field, leaving those two hunters empty-handed. Then on to Elrond.
I palanumen, I alfirime nori, na meta avante.
Yes, Elrond is half-elven, the future leader of the elves, played by Hugo Weaving in the Peter Jackson films, but here played by Robert Aramayo, who played young Ned Stark in Game of Thrones. The Quenya he reads and writes translates to the far west, the undying lands, 'tis an end denied. Yes, as the king's herald, he is writing the speech that Gil-galad will later recite. As Galadriel and Elrond speak to each other, notice how the camera stays tight on their faces. This is a recurring visual that the director J.A. Bayona uses. Just an interesting contrast with all the sweeping landscapes we see in the series, including this overhead shot showing them with the crashing waves beneath, as if the sea is beckoning Galadriel to leave the matters of Middle-earth behind. But even though she doesn't go to Valinor, her destiny remains on the seas, because that is where she meets Halbrand. Marigold tells Nori,
We are but ripples in a long, long stream. Our path set by the passing seasons.
interesting how high elves like Galadriel see themselves as a boat on a stream, whereas the Harfoots see themselves as the ripples of that stream. Yet, how that is so freeing for them. A freedom that Galadriel, by leaving the boat and becoming the ripple, will give herself. As Gil-galad honors Galadriel and her consort with the ceremony, right before he crowns her, there's a look of defiance in her eyes, because she knows that sending them to Valinor isn't really an honor for her, it's more of an exile. As we will learn later, Gil-galad even admits that the shadow of the past does still exist. He does this because he worries Galadriel's hunt is just going to further incite its rise. Galadriel visits this grove, honoring all these fallen elven warriors. All of these are famous figures. The first we see is her brother Finrod, but we also see this female carving. This is likely Luthien, Elrond's ancestor who fell in love with the human Beren, the female elf famous for beating Morgoth at one point. Beside her is her hound, Huan. Elrond warns that if Galadriel refuses the call to Valinor,
He will linger here, an outcast, poisoned in dark whispers and dreams.
but Galadriel rightly says that this kind of eternal paradise would just drive her mad.
You say I have won victory over all the horrors of Middle-earth. Yet you would leave them alive in me.
Yes, leaving the horrors of battle alive and eternal war heroes? Yeah, Galadriel would rather live on as the bark of a tree than actually live forever with regret. On to the Southlands, where we meet Arundel, a Sylvan elf serving as a soldier patrolling these areas. After all, many of these Southlanders years ago did stand with Morgoth. Their side lost, and many of them still haven't gotten over it, including the drunken Rowan in the bar here, who says that their true king will return and the South will rise again. But this actually poses an interesting theory. Who is this king who will return. I'll talk about that a bit later. It is worth noting though that the section of the map that shows the Southlands with that range of mountains to the west actually matches the map region where Mordor is located later on in history. It's possible that we are now seeing the origins of Mordor on this series. Maybe those orcs digging under everything are currently terraforming this land. Preparing. Outside, Bronwyn gives Arundel some Alfarin seeds. Alfarin is a flower that he hasn't seen since he was a child because Arundel grew up in the Beleriand. That was the landmass that sank in the War of Wrath. So these flowers were native to that area and would be very, very hard to find. His partner Medhor says,
only twice in known history has a pairing between elves and humans even been attempted.
So one of these pairings was Luthien and Beren, Elrond's ancestors. But that's not the only side of the family where he's had these pairings, because another pairing was Tuor and Idril. Their son was Arundel, the mariner who birthed Elrond and his brother Elros, whom we're gonna meet in episode 3 most likely. Arundel and Bronwyn realize this poison cow is grazing east at Hordern, and they head off, and Theo sneaks in his friend, Southrazican, to check out this ancient broken sword that's marked with Sauron's sigil. And he gets a vision of flames, just as touching the Ring of Power would flash one the Eye of Sauron. So one big mystery of the series is, since it promises to show the return of Sauron, which of these characters might be Sauron in disguise? Could it be the mystery stranger who arrives with a meteorite? Could it be Galadriel's Southlander exile in episode 2, Halbrand? I don't know. I don't know if we've met the character who's going to be revealed as Sauron yet. We might not even meet him in the first season of this show. In fact, it could be that Sauron just lives on in this broken sword, looking for a host to corrupt and possess. In episode 2, we do see Theo giving some of his blood to help this sword reforge and grow. Could it be Theo who becomes Sauron's host? Or maybe Theo could become one of the Nazgul, like a king from the Southlands, who becomes one of the 9 men who carries the 9 rings of power. In terms of what sword this is, I wonder if it's the Angrist, the sword of Bjorn, that cut a Silmaril jewel from the Iron Crown of Morgoth, and then shortly after shattered. One of its shards supposedly remained lodged in Morgoth's body. Bronwyn leaves Arundel over the hill, this shot paralleling Finrod's arrival to the glorious Valinor in the opening scene, but this time the town is in flaming ruins. Galadriel and the rest approach the Valinor, birds greet them, the warriors join the song of the Valinor. It all feels very culty, but still beautiful. The passage into the Valinor takes the form of a blinding, rainy mist, which perfectly adapts Tolkien's description of the gray rain curtain in the far green country, first from Fellowship of the Ring and Frodo's dream in the House of Tom Bombadil, a memory that was called back at the very end of Return of the King. Peter Jackson actually reassigned this description to Gandalf when he was talking to Pippin in Return of the King.
The grey rain curtain of this world rolls back, and all turns to silver glass. And then you see it, white shores, and beyond, the far green country, and to a swift sunrise.
But as Galadriel remembers Finrod's wisdom about a sinking stone, in this moment, we cut to a meteor crashing from the sky. One thing finally linking all of these characters together, including a family of Ents, a parent clutching its young. This meteor is the metaphorical stone that contrasts Galadriel's boat from the opening parallel. It represents the darkness and the mystery that she must first touch before she can pass on. I actually love that the moment this stone crashes, the sound effect syncs with the moment Galadriel crashes into the water, like a stone. And maybe it's just a coincidence, but as the Valinor gate closes, the slit it forms does resemble the Eye of Sauron. Sauron being the returning evil that awaits her back in Middle-earth. Visually, it also links her with another eye shape, the Crater of the Stranger, which brings us on to episode 2. Now we get an awesome opening credits sequence, the imagery forming grains of sand and rock, converging first into 9 rings, representing the 9 rings forged for the men. 3 were forged for the elves, 7 for the dwarves, and 1 for me. Then we see the 2 trees of Valinor, their branches facing each other. We also see amongst all this the 8-pointed Feanorian star, also the sigil of Numenor, and when the black sand snakes in, the sand now takes the shape of just 1 ring. And these countless grains of sand in the opening credits transition into the countless stars of the sky seen by Galadriel. It's actually pretty parallel to the way the Stranger uses fireflies as star stand-ins to form his constellation. But here with Galadriel, some of the stars stand out, likely the constellation she uses to navigate. But back at the meteor crash site, Poppy causes Nori to tumble down into it.
So hot.
Yes, heat is interesting in the show. It's similar to the way the torches in Morgoth's castle that produce no heat because of all the evil there, or the way that the One Ring's runes are revealed in fire, yet the ring itself stays quite cool. What is it about evil being endothermic? The Stranger grabs Nori and he screams, releasing wind and levitating rubble, suggesting that he carries a kind of sorcery. Now, the popular theory is that this is Gandalf. That would contradict Tolkien's original timeline. Gandalf and the other wizards were sent to Middle-earth during the Third Age by the Valar to help fight Sauron Sauron. But the way this stranger whispers to the fireflies is actually pretty similar to the way Ian McKellen Gandalf whispered to the moth. His stick breaking in the dirt syncs up perfectly with Nori's dad's ankle snapping. The stranger's experience with the Harfoots here could explain Gandalf's affection for the hobbits later on. Others are speculating that this could be a mix of Tolkien's blue wizards, who were believed to have arrived in Middle-earth during the Second Age when the One Ring was forged. But since this series is calling this character the Stranger, it's clear that the producers are setting up this character to be revealed as a well-known character just with this new origin. So I'm thinking Gandalf. Gandalf! But also maybe Saruman, since Saruman would have been the first wizard sent by the Valar, if they're sticking with that origin story at all. On to Eregion, the elven smith city, where Elrond marvels over this hammer.
Feanor's hammer, the tool that wrote the Silmarils, the jewels that contain the very light of Valinor.
Yes, Feanor was Celebrimbor's grandfather. Again, the Silmarils, the three jewels that the wars of the previous age were fought over. Celebrimbor has apparently learned nothing from history, and now he wants to build an Old Testament-styled Tower of Babel, in this case a tower that could host a forge. Clearly the forge that will be used to create the 19 rings.
I need it completed by spring.
Why by spring? Why are you on such a deadline, you jerk? I'm guessing he may have already been approached by Anatar, aka Sauron's disguise, during this era. So they venture to the dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm. Elrond is surprised to be denied passage, so he invokes the Rite of Sigintarag, which in the language of Khazad-dûl translates to the Rite of Longbeards, because we later learn this is a test of endurance between Elrond and his old friend Prince Durin IV. Inside, I love how this city is a thriving kingdom. We actually saw this as ruins in Fellowship of the Ring, but here, back in this era, plant life is sunned by beams of light directed by mirrors. These beams were actually seen by Frodo when the Fellowship took camp in one of the halls. Back with Nori, the stranger repeats the words mana, which means what is, and then ure, which means heat. So if he is saying what is heat, that again could connect with this idea of the crash site being cold, maybe this being unfamiliar with what heat even is. He could come from some place that has no heat or warmth at all, or someone forged in fire but has had his memory wiped of what that is. Meanwhile, Galadriel swims up on some wreckage with the castaways fearing the sea worm, and of course the sea worm strikes again. One of these castaways is Halbrand, and I just love this single take of Galadriel swimming toward the camera as Halbrand in the background pushes off and the worm wipes out the others. The first guy gets knocked off and the camera dives underwater just to see him get eaten, and then the others get thrown in the water and the tail of the sea worm swipes them down to the depths. Meanwhile, after Elrond submits to the challenge, Durin reveals the true reason he's so pissed off.
20 years may be the blink of an eye to an elf, but I've lived an entire life in that time. A life you missed.
Yes, so elves live far longer than the other races do. The producers of the show are condensing time so that events happen faster so we wouldn't have to kill off the humans every season of the show. But I like how here, with the relationship between these two characters, they keep the sentiment of that conflict. Because elven time dilation is a serious thing and makes them detached from the other races. One of the reasons all the other races don't really trust them. Durin's wife Disa tells Elrond about resonating. This is a dwarven tradition of singing into a cavern, vibrating it with frequency to clear it and find these mineral deposits.
You see, a mountain's like a person. It's a long and ever-changing story made of countless small parts. Sing to it properly. Each of those parts will reflect your song back to you, telling you its story, where to mine, where to tunnel, and where to leave the mountain untouched.
Yes, untouched is the interesting part there. Like the Harfoots, the dwarves have this sensitivity toward nature, and in this case, when intervention by men, dwarves, or elves pushes nature too far. Later, we see Durin and his father, King Durin III, were actually worried that Elrond was really there to ask about a secret resource that they keep in a chest, glowing Pulp Fiction briefcase style. I'm wondering if this could be mithril, the mineral that we see Durin IV holding in the trailer, that of course is later used to make the chainmail that Frodo wears. Back on the raft, Galadriel spots a necklace with a mysterious symbol that Halbrand hastily tucks away. She thinks it's the sigil of his king, and it is similar to the runes that we see in the Southland in the scene right after this. I'm now wondering if he could be Theo's long-lost Southlander father, and he, like Aragorn, could be the king that they want to return. But the tunnels beneath Hordern, turns out, are filled with orcs. Some snatch Arundel, another proves to be those bastard mice that Theo's been complaining about under their home. The way they take it down is pretty impressive. Bronwyn throws at that orc the jar of powdered fire root that she warned Theo about pulverizing too quickly in episode 1, which we see why. When you breathe it in, it causes you to convulse a little bit. They defeat it though with Bronwyn decapitating it and slamming that head on the bar, getting its blood all over the camera. I love it. Back in the storm, a lightning bolt smashes the mast and sends Galadriel sinking to the depths, like that stone in Finrod's parable, yet it is the memory of Finrod that ends up saving her, as Halbrand uses the Finrod dagger to cut her free. So yes, she touches the darkness, and she ends this episode finding that light again, as it blinds her from seeing the seafarer who has found them. I'm thinking it's gonna be our man Isildur, the Númenorian, who will one day tell Elrond,
No.
Again, I'm really digging this series. We're gonna try to keep up with it every week, either with breakdowns from me, or at the very least, some Talkin' Tolkien segments on our Talkin' Dragons after show. Follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter at Erik Voss. Subscribe to New Rockstars for more analysis of everything you love. Thanks for watching. Bye.